have so many of you here because I know there's a lot of competing events with Parents Weekend and Ring Day being today and all of that kind of stuff. So I'm glad to see even students here, and of course, as always, our faculty. Well, we have a special treat for you as our last seminar. This has been this semester where we've had Director General, a couple of the CG centers, international CG centers, as well as USAID representatives. And so today, no different. National Development, and it is David Atteberry. And please help me welcome him here. I'm going to give you a little bit on his bio, but let's go ahead and welcome David here. Well, he serves currently as a Deputy Assistant Administrator for the Bureau for Economic Growth, Education, and Environment. It's 3 E's, so they usually refer to it as E3, USAID. He previously served as the Mission Director in Nepal, where he oversaw a staff of about 100 employees. He was, before Nepal, a Deputy Mission Director in Afghanistan and Ghana. And in fact, as I could tell you for many, many minutes, which I won't because we don't have the time for that, his career, and I'm probably not fixing the camera. I don't want to be on the camera, so that works out well. Spans about 35 years where he has worked in 11 countries. So quite an accomplishment. He began with the United Nations Development Program and also was a U.S. Peace Corps volunteer in the Central African Republic. So those of you who maybe have served in the Peace Corps, or maybe some of you who think of doing that, that certainly was a great start for Atteberry. In '82, he joined USAID for the first time, and he worked in Zaire as an ambassador in the Ministry of Agriculture. In '87, later he became a Foreign Service Officer, and as the Agriculture Officer. In '92 to '96, he as Project Development Officer. Then '96 to '98, Officer in Jamaica as the Division Chief for the Africa Bureau's Office of West African Affairs. In '02 to '05, Officer for Guinea and Sierra Leone, all in West Africa. and then became director of the Regional Economic Growth and Integration Office for East Africa. Lastly, he served as the AID representative in an embedded provincial reconstruction team with the 4th Combat Brigade, 1st Infantry, Baghdad, Iraq. Not an easy assignment, and he did an extremely good job and lived to tell the tale, which is even more important than that. Their development expertise to the military, which is extremely important to do. But with all of these accolades in Mr. Atteberry's career, his incredible accomplishments, the salient aspect of his resume is that he's an Aggie. Okay. He received his master's degree in international agricultural development and his bachelor's degree in wildlife fisheries here at Texas A&M, class of '78, I believe, is what he's told me. So please, again, let us give a warm Aggie welcome to David Atteberry.
I was back here one time for one day a couple of years ago, but since then, it's been since '81 since I've been here. And I have to really thank and give a lot of credit to Dr. James Christensen, who was my advisor in my graduate degree program. I distinctly remember a lot of the classes at that time. At that time, it was the International Agricultural Development degree program. I had just come back from 2 years at the Peace Corps. Dr. Christensen was my advisor, and it really got me off on the right foot, and I really appreciate it. And I always remember. I was surprised to see you still coming to work every day, but it's fantastic to be back. Gosh, how things have changed. I guess there's probably 30,000 students when I was here, and there was basically nothing, west of the the railroad tracks. Of course, the vet school was there. I think the plant sciences, the vet school was there, and the food science building was one of the first ones, but it was just all fields.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'm glad to be here. I thought what might be of interest to folks who are interested in international development is to kind of give a perspective of kind of how the international development field has evolved and changed over the past decades since when I started it back in 78, because we've seen some tremendous changes, and it's continuing to change. So what I'd like to do is just start off with a video. And my presentation today has several videos sprinkled throughout because they tell a good story.
Today, we seek to move beyond the accomplishments of the past, to establish the principle that all the people are entitled to a decent way of life. We have made a good start on our journey, but we have still a long way to go. The conquest of poverty is as difficult, if not more difficult, than the conquest of outer space. And we can expect moments of frustration and disappointment. But we have no doubt about the outcome. For all history shows that the effort to win progress represents the most determined and steadfast aspirations of man. Our problems are man-made, therefore they can be solved by man. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We We all cherish our children's futures. And we are all mortal.
That's a pretty inspirational film for me. I get a lot of energy out of the time I see that clip. It's just amazing to hear President Kennedy's words back then and how they still resound today. It's really amazing. So, real briefly, the origins of, I started when I looked at this. Actually, the U.S. involvement internationally in development you can actually date it back to the late 1800s. The first big industrialists. It wasn't U.S. government per se, but industrialists like the Rockefellers were engaged internationally back then. But development assistance and international aid really became foreign policy for the first time under the Marshall Plan in 1948 to rebuild the economy of Europe. And then building upon that, President Truman proposed in an international development assistance program, the 1949 of the Point Four program. And the Point Four program focused on two goals. The first one being creating markets for the United States by reducing poverty and increasing production in developing countries. And the second point was the goal was to diminish the threat of communism by helping countries prosper under capitalism. So this really kind of marked the first time that international development assistance became part of the foreign policy. During this period, the development approach and the delivery of assistance was fairly straightforward. It was primarily just direct cash transfers and direct provision of technical assistance government to government. Of course, food relief and humanitarian assistance, and a lot of infrastructure development. So in 1961, President Kennedy signed the Foreign Assistance Act into law, which established USAID. And with the establishment of AID, I would say this is a period where development as a discipline really began to evolve. The 60s development was about, in terms of a development approach, was about long-term institution building, long-term participant training, infrastructure, and economic policy development were the areas that we mostly focused on. The 60s also saw a stepped up focus on rural poverty alleviation, vocational training, and it was the first instance of integrating and planned coordination and collaboration with the military. In this instance, in Vietnam, an organization called CORDS at the time. The 70s continued to make investments in long-term institution building. The 70s also saw a big shift towards focus on basic human needs, and also on notions of local solutions and local development cooperatives. And also during the 70s was the first introducing of big efforts in family planning. And family planning continues today to be a major development effort. In terms of approach and financing, it's still a lot of government-to-government delivery of technical assistance. Universities have played a big role during these decades. Texas A&M has always a big player in the international development. A lot of the agricultural institutions in Central and Latin America can trace their roots back to working with A&M. It was also during this period the first time that we started specific strategic, country-specific development strategies. which was new. Now, and financing was primarily through grants and cash transfers. So remember that one, because it's changing a lot. In 1962, to give you an idea, development assistance represented 0.58% of the U.S. GDP and 3.06% of the overall budget. This is in $2,000. So 3% of the budget was really big. So in '78 is when my career started. I graduated, like Elsa said, in '78 with a degree in wildlife and fisheries. I was in the Central African. It was actually the Central African Empire at the time. Central African Republic was led by Emperor Bokassa at the time. I was a fisheries volunteer. And then when I first joined, after graduate school, when I joined USAID, my first job was as an embedded advisor in the Ministry of Agriculture. I was the counterpart to the National Director of Inland Fisheries. And that was a fantastic period of my life. So in 1980 now, so international development assistance now represents 0.2% of their GDP and 0.99%, so 1% of our overall budget. So it's already been reduced a third from what it was in 1962. Each slide depicts the countries I served in during this period. I didn't really realize it at the time, but there was a real turning point in development at this time. The fall of communism opened up entry for USAID and development efforts. But not very much. Primarily, our development programs in these countries focused on notions of privatization of state-owned enterprises, general private sector development, and introducing concepts of market-driven development. So it was our real first exposure, and then in working in this area. And then for the first time, USAID became engaged in democracy programs. Prior to the early 90s, we were not engaged in Soviet states. We really stepped up and we were asked to become engaged in that arena, which had previously been the domain of the U.S. State Department. But we really kicked off a long-term and continuing programs and efforts in strengthening civil society organizations and encouraging and promoting good democratic governance. Unfortunately, at the same time during this period, we saw a drop-off and a decline in budgets and spending in agriculture and education. Also, it became a real decline in our AID budget overall. In the mid-90s, we actually reached a low point. And we went through a reduction in force where the worldwide foreign service officers had actually dipped down below 800 worldwide. So like when I started, there was about 4,000 foreign service officers in AID, a low point in the mid-90s. Now, at the turn of the century, it's really brought us into a new period. So from the turn of the century to really today, it's really being highlighted by increasing focus on fragile states in conflict, and now the rise of violent extremism. Now, unfortunately, corresponding with a budget decline, our mission and mandate was asked to modify that as well. During the post 9/11 era, with the Afghanistan and Iraq wars being in full swing, AID was called upon to help those countries rebuild their government and civil society and basic social services like health and education. One of the highlights of my career was as a member of the first group of U.S. civilians in 2007, the civilian surge. I was in the group that was an embedded advisor in a combat brigade in South Baghdad, and this was the first time that civilians were actually integrated in active combat units since Vietnam. And so that was a really exciting period, an interesting period of my career. With the continuing declining budgets, AID began to continue to reach out to extend its delivery of assistance through partnering more increasingly with the private sector. And another big initiative was under President Bush's initiative to combat the worldwide HIV/AIDS pandemic. And this program has had a lot of impacts on AID. I could talk about that for a long time, but in terms of how we budget and plan and report and monitor on programs, it's a model that fortunately or unfortunately, depending on where you sit, is being replicated across many of our so this brings us to the present, and this slide's out of order. Let me see. So when I look back today, what's different from when I started? One of the big differences is just without a doubt how much the world is connected today. There's so much more interconnectivity. I want to see if the internet and the worldwide communications and social media is really changing the world greater than any time since the Industrial Revolution. I mean, it's just it's amazing how much more connected and integrated we are. It's also been much more difficult now these days for repressive regimes to control their population with the advent of social media. And this played out, we saw that in the Arab Spring. It's also been within the last 10 years or so, another important development has really been the elevation of the role and importance of development as a tool in the foreign policy toolbox, if you will. It is along with defense and diplomacy. So now in Washington and there is a national security strategy which views development, diplomacy, and defense as the three major tools of our national foreign policy strategy, which that has really changed and had a lot of implications for us. Finally, probably one of the biggest differences is the role of the private sector and the flows of private capital for financing, for development in the developing world. When I started out, there was very little, for example, foreign direct investment in Africa and worldwide compared to official development assistance. Today, the private capital flows to the developing world dwarf official development assistance. Something in the magnitude of $9 out of $10 going to the developing world now are private capital. And so this has opened up a huge opportunity driven how we work. So as I said, the world's connectivity now means that we have the ability to partner very differently, and how to access new ideas and how to finance development. And these are cornerstones of what internally we were referred to as the AID's new model of development. And that's new ways of partnering and crowdsourcing ideas and innovations and solutions and new ways of financing development. because that's what the future is. So I'm going to show a little video now, which will set up a discussion on some of these.
As the U.S. Secretary of State recently said, this is a time of great change. The world's population is growing toward 8 billion citizens, and demographic shifts are remaking societies with huge numbers of young people in some places and aging populations in others. Grassroots democracy movements are demanding more transparency from those who lead, yet many now grapple with how to turn their democratic ideals into functioning governments and prosperous economies. Changes to the climate, such as more frequent and severe storms, floods, droughts, and warmer temperatures, present serious risks to the well-being and livelihoods of millions of people. Major new players are emerging in the global economy, and large corporations with millions of customers and thousands of employees worldwide recognize the imperative to focus on social and economic development. Meanwhile, technology is changing how people everywhere work, learn, and communicate. The world is changing. And so is USAID. USAID's new model of development seeks to work together in innovative ways with other donors and public sector entities, the private sector, civil society, and with individuals who have good ideas to share, no matter where they are in the world. USAID recognizes that no one organization can solve the world's challenges alone. That's why USAID is committed to building partnerships with the private sector. Public-private partnerships provide a means for USAID to benefit from the expertise, creativity, and resources of other organizations and individuals. Since 2001, USAID has created over 1,600 partnerships with more than 3,000 distinct partners. Because by working with corporations, local businesses, non-governmental organizations, charitable foundations, universities, scientists, and diaspora organizations, we can accomplish more together than any of us could accomplish alone. Because all of us share the vision of a safer, healthier, and more prosperous world.
So for the remainder of today's presentation, I want to talk about two major elements of expanding how and who we partner with and how we are financing development in different ways. We also know and understand much more keenly than we ever have that aid dollars, aid development assistance alone can't address underdevelopment. In fact, sometimes development, if it's not used carefully, it can inhibit, for example, if our development assistance is displacing capital investments, private capital investments, and local, inhibiting, if it's distorting or weakening the development of political will in countries for governments to do the right thing. Or it can, if our assistance is distorting or displacing the ability of local entities and local institutions and local actors to take the lead and ability for their own development. And finally, we realize that and recognize that we need to be tapping into the ideas and crowdsourcing innovative ideas and solutions, especially local solutions from around the world. And today, compared to when I started with media and connectivity, we harness the solutions that are out there. Now, of course, the idea of partnering in general, collaboratively with organizations and institutions is not new. And many of our partners, of course, will continue to be some of the traditional ones you would expect, time-honored partnerships with organizations and universities that we know of are going to continue. But today we've been recently partnering with a new group. It's actually a chuckle out of the term high net worth individuals, and that's strangely enough, it really is a growing a group of donors and resources that are out there, like the Gates Foundation. I believe A&M works with Buffett Foundation in some capacity. So those are a real, that's a real growing area. But of course, the real explosion in partnerships over the past 10 years or so has been with private sector corporations. We have to ask ourselves, how have these partnerships evolved over the years? Why would corporations partner with USAID? If you remember in my opening remarks, I mentioned that some of the first international assistance actually began in the late 19th century with early industrialists, for primarily philanthropic reasons. And so for a long period of time, the engagement of corporations and private sector was based on a lot of philanthropy. Then we went through a period where there was an increasing alignment of interest around corporate social responsibility. And many big firms still today maintain CSR units within their company. However, today we know that really the best driver and motivation, which really is resulting in a sustainable relationship, is where the development community finds shared values with corporate interests. But most important, when there's an intersection of development interests can affect the bottom line of a company and organization. And this slide kind of reflects that. So at the end of the day, you can really demonstrate when there's a shared interest that really affects corporations, a bottom line, that is going to be the key to a long enduring relationship. The next slide gives you an idea of some of the ways some of the new ways we are partnering. This is through an effort called DIV, Development Innovation Ventures.
Not every problem can be categorized. It's not always clear where to find solutions.
3 years ago, there was no way to easily walk into a development agency and say, I have got an idea that's going to change the world.
USAID wants to be open to new ideas. We recognize that we're not going to come up with all the best ideas ourselves.
What we're trying to do is essentially say, look, we're a global one-stop shop for a good idea. Any country, any sector, anybody who has an idea that they can solve a development challenge in a more cost-effective and more evidence-based way.
We are DIV, Development Innovation Ventures.
We are essentially the development venture capitalists or the development angel investors.
We want to try to adapt and harness the venture capital model, which has been so successful for the developed world.
We are looking specifically for ideas that will scale across countries and broadly across a number of regions.
We take ideas from everywhere and everyone and put them through a rigorous evaluation process to see if they can be a part of the new solution problems.
I would not be in the work of development if I didn't think that the work that I do here could have a huge impact.
Any ideas open, it's complete open innovation. If you have a great development idea, pitch it to us, 5-page business plan.
Built into each project is components, and when non-successful, that's great. Then we try not to do that kind of thing again.
We're going to go in relatively cheaply at the beginning, and if there's more evidence, then the same continues throughout. We'll put in a little more.
The main impetus is to see if the idea works behind it.
I think now bring change. So bring something that many people they have not idea. They don't have idea, and that's come on.
The Development Innovation Ventures of USAID is a key partner. They are supporting and funding a large trial of the e-commerce technology, which is the biggest weapon humanity has. to end the scourge of tuberculosis across the world.
We need to think differently, we need to partner differently to radically reinvent foreign assistance development and the way that we can create a prosperous, fair, and healthy world for everyone.
So here are two real quick examples of divs. Let's kind of tell us and illustrate. These are both at stage 2 of financing. If you remember in the video, they talk about there's a phase financing approach where phase 1 will be just to test the idea to see if there's something there. And then if it seems to have something there, then we'll go on to phase 2 of the financing. So it's a tiered financing approach. The first is a good example of the growing utilization of mobile phone and digital technologies. Besides using mobile technologies for cash payments and cash transfers, and in this particular instance, the Harvard Business School of Microfinance is partnering with a local Indian company that's using and experimenting the use of mobile technologies for ag extension services. Phase 1 was just to test it, just to see if farmers would even use it. And lo and behold, it was been wildly successful. And so they're actually moving on to phase 2, testing at scale. The second example is a good illustration that innovation doesn't necessarily always revolve around some technology, but it also can be in areas of finance. Poor farmers are often forced to sell their crops at harvest time when prices are lowest because they need immediate income. They like access to crop storage. So in partnership with the government of Sierra Leone and several community banks in Kono and the Kailaun districts, researchers at MIT and a group called Innovations for Poverty Action are testing a crop-based lending model, which private banks store farmers' crops at the time of harvest as collateral and give loans to the farmer with the goal of reducing the damaging effects of price seasonality. So there's some interesting financial ways of innovations that are also being tested and increasingly used. The next video is another type of crowdsourcing effort. It's a little bit different. It's called Grand Challenges. This is one on powering agriculture.
Energy is critical to sustaining life because energy is vital to producing one of the basic necessities, food, in quantities that will meet the world's ever-growing population. And yet, energy is often unavailable to the farmers, food producers, and distributors in developing countries who grow and sell food. Energy access affects people at every stage of the agricultural value chain. With energy, a farmer can use irrigation to grow more food, can decrease the amount of food that spoils after the harvest through refrigeration, and can earn more income through processing, such as making milk into cheese or drying fruit. But energy access means more than just feeding families and communities. Access to energy allows a farmer to produce more food at lower cost in less time. This means she has more time to spend with her family, participate in her community, and grow her business. Without energy, a farmer's productivity and income are limited. She can't feed her country or grow its economy. All too often, she can't even feed her family. So how do we connect farmers and farm-related businesses to the energy that will allow them to increase production, security, and profits? How can they get access to energy that is both clean and affordable? The key is coming up with innovative, sustainable energy solutions that will transform the lives of these farmers. But who will provide these big ideas? You. Join the Powering Agriculture Energy Grand Challenge for Development. Help us find the market-based solutions that will offer farmers in developing countries clean, reliable, affordable power. Power that will help increase food security and drive economic growth. Be part of the solution. Visit poweringag.org to learn more. Join the discussion and share your ideas and innovations.
So if you remember on the other video on development on the divs, there was the divs. It was a little different model in the fact that and under that program, crowdsourcing, it's a crowdsourcing for any idea. It's open. Grand challenges are constructed around a specific problem set, and so this was an example of there's been 6 grand challenges so far. That have been launched. One, you just saw the one on powering agriculture. There's also a grand challenge around saving lives at birth. There's one, making all voices count. It's about strengthening civil society and democracy. There's one around Ebola. There's one around water for food, and then this last one you saw. So the grand challenges are constructed and established around a specific problem set and idea. Here's an example of one of the award winners in the Powering Ag Grand Challenge. So throughout sub-Saharan Africa, the dairy industry really suffers from a lack of proper refrigeration. So, large dairies are really constrained. They can't export milk to neighboring markets due to the international standards requiring that milk be cooled within 4 hours of collection. So as a consequence, small farmers typically lose 20 to 50% of their milk due to spoilage, due to lack of access to energy for refrigeration units. This is a University of Georgia Ag Research Foundation has worked with the local companies to develop a refrigeration unit that's powered on biogas, which is extracted from the cow manure. So that's an example of a powering ag grand challenge. So we've seen how we're tapping into new ideas, new partnerships. We've also seen how we're harnessing new sources of development financing. This is just an illustration of actually, even since when I joined, the exponential growth, and I keep on harping on this because it can't be overstated. The growth of private capital flows to the developing world, and Africa in particular. Today, back in Washington, one of the things I'm doing right now in my bureau is actually creating a new office, an office for private capital mobilization, which is focuses on this notion of we refer to it as transactional financing for development. And this is kind of a generic model of how it works. And it's basically, you have all this capital sitting out there now, investors really looking for new markets and new areas. Africa is really a real booming area for investment, especially venture capitalists. So you have investors on one end, and you have developers around infrastructure, energy investment. But to put together an investment-ready package requires this whole series of intervening steps and pieces of the package. From the feasibility, cost benefit, the technical aspects, the environmental aspects, the policy, the regulatory. There's a lot of pieces to the package before it becomes investment ready. Now, when a project pipeline becomes investment ready, there are other U.S. organizations like OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, that can give loans to investment-ready projects. The problem is in Africa, most projects that are in a pipeline don't ever come to transactions are never completed. Only about 1 out of 20 that are on the drawing board ever become real. So what this office does and what our USAID does is we identify these programs and proposals, these projects that are in a pipeline that are being developed, and they're stuck. They're stuck somewhere. One of these pieces that I've highlighted, for example, in this case, there's a policy or a regulatory issue that needs to be addressed before that transaction can actually close and happen. So we come in and we provide technical assistance, what's needed to fill that missing piece to enable the transaction to happen, which will trigger and unleash the capital for that particular development outcome. So it's kind of a generic model of what we're doing, and it's a huge growth area for us. And I must confess, we're still frankly learning exactly how best to operate in this space. Now, we have for a long time actually have worked in the area of financing. Probably the most well-known and earliest approach in mobilizing capital is through a program through our Development Credit Authority. This is a guarantee program that, in this, so Congress has given USAID legal authority to issue credit guarantees that are actually backed by U.S. Treasury. And so, in the simple, one of the main constraints to investing in the development sectors is the unwillingness of banks to lend money in sectors that they're not familiar with, that they're perceived. So in this instance, we help by mitigating this risk to banks. And here's a short video. This is one of my favorite videos because it really, without saying a word, it tells the story very good of how DCAs work. Yeah, I like that video. It does a good job of telling the story. It's really a neat idea. I actually was just in a meeting with Andrew Natsios, and he was very instrumental in launching and really getting this program going. So this is a really good example of what we mean by mobilizing private capital. This program is actually expanding a lot of different ways now. Even expanding. One of the really exciting new areas that I'm really interested in is that we're using this type of tool in guaranteeing and issuing municipal bonds, and that's a great tool in developing countries to get putting local capital to work for local development issues. And we're using this mechanism and tool to help stimulate the growth of the issuance and building of municipal bonds around the continent. And it's a great way of harnessing, once again, that local capital. Historically, one of the problems has been in the wealthy in Africa, where they would send their money to Europe or investments externally to the country, but there's been a lot of interest from African countries in the whole municipal bond futures. And this is another area that we're really working on and very interested in. So it's been a long presentation. I want to close with one last video, kind of on where we are now and where we're shaping and setting our vision for the future.
Our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all cherish our children's future, and we are all mortal.
Today, we seek to move beyond the accomplishments of the past, to establish the present, that all the people are entitled to a decent way of life.
Let us not forget that each child saved, each refugee housed, each disease prevented, each barrier to justice brought down, each sword turned into a plowshare brings us closer to peace, closer to freedom, closer to dignity.
America is a nation with a mission. And that mission comes from our most basic beliefs. Our aim is a democratic peace. A peace founded upon the dignity and rights of every man and woman.
We also know that progress in the most impoverished parts of our world enriches us all. So the United States will join with our allies to eradicate such extreme poverty in the next 2 decades by connecting more people to the global economy, by empowering women, by giving our young and brightest minds new opportunities to serve, helping communities to feed, empower, and educate themselves. By saving the world's children from preventable deaths. That's how we'll confront the challenges of our time. This is how we will seize the promise of this moment in history. Who are we to believe that today's challenges cannot be overcome? Well, we've seen what changes the human spirit can bring. That's why we look to the future not with fear, but with hope.
Another good film. If you remember the very first presentation film clip was, in the words of President Kennedy, who really spoke very passionately about, this vision of tackling poverty and the human condition. This last video, what it shows to me is how this vision is still an enduring vision over the past 50 years. And all the presidents are still talking about it and still this vision. But for the first time, what's different now today, for the first time in our history, we can actually see a light at the end of the tunnel, where we can really dare to dream to think that we can actually see the day when there's an elimination of extreme poverty, and so it's within our grasp, and so that's a huge difference from when we started out 50 years ago. Assistance and how we approach development and how it's financed has evolved over the years, and that you'll take a little bit away from you, and hopefully I'll see you all Day. So thank you very much. This has been wonderful.
Okay, any questions for